All right, looks like we're going. Welcome back to another one of these things where we're just kind of chatting about whatever comes to mind. You might notice a little bit more light coming in from that angle. I went to go close the blinds, and Rose was just like, please don't close the blinds. I want to keep looking out the window. So I decided to leave them open this time. I've never actually seen her lean forward like so much out of her chair. There's a little chair behind me, or not a little chair. It's a big chair. It's a recliner. Nobody sits in it but her anymore. She likes leaning off of the arm of the chair to look out the window. And when I went to go close the blind, she was just like, "No, I don't want to keep looking." So I'm like, "Okay, fine. We'll keep it there." So a little bit brighter to my left. Looks like you're right, but my left. So hopefully that doesn't end up making my face look really weird. So far it looks all right, surprisingly. Still got all the other lights going on. I'm not sure if I need them. We'll see. Anyway, hope your Friday is going wonderful, and it is indeed Friday. We'll be we're at the weekend now. I'm gonna say we're gonna be at the weekend shortly because I don't know why I just kind of construed this as work, which I suppose it is still. Like, I'm doing something that I don't have to necessarily do. Not getting paid for this, just kind of feel like doing it. So, but it's still something to do. I can kind of call it work, I suppose. But yeah, something that was kind of in, without talking about like a game specifically today. And I guess this is kind of in line with last week too, when we were talking about like collections and memorizing things more easily. This kind of goes with not so much playing games, but thinking about how games are made. So, one of the things that I did prior to becoming a programmer and subsequently a manager of development teams was wanting to be a game designer. When I was in college, I was studying to write music. I wanted to make music for games. And about, 3 years into it, so like, exactly when everybody decides like the thing that they actually want to do isn't what they're going to school for, is when I was like, you know what, actually designing games is pretty darn fun. I had been doing that with a friend of mine for a few years out of college, where we would just get together all the time, not like constantly, but we get together fairly often and just put together designs for games. We'd occasionally put together code for these things, and we'd have little demos of stuff to put together. And when just the amount of satisfaction and fulfillment that I got out of that was just extreme. And I'm like I could still write music for these things that we create, but that design process, coming up with an idea and finding the fun elements, the things that make it fun for you to make, but also compelling for others to play, was a very interesting problem that I enjoyed immensely solving. Not that I have any like published games or anything. All the stuff that I built is basically just for friends. But I did spend a bit of time after my university years going to community college. I was initially going to go to another university, a for-profit university, to learn about creating games, programming for games, and things like that. And I couldn't afford that after just coming out of a 4-year university, and I already had a bunch of student loans I need to repay. So I was basically like, all right, what are the core components of game design, and how can I make this work with courses at a community college? And I'm building my own degree, essentially, by getting a bunch of different certifications that would hopefully teach me everything that I needed to be a game designer, in my opinion, to be a game designer. And like, since I first got that idea, the core part of what I thought a designer was just being able to connect all the parts of the process together. Well, I guess I didn't really come to that. That's kind of getting to where I want to go with this, is when I was initially putting designs together, like, I always kind of thought a designer is an idea person, and like there might have been a time when that was a very real thing, and there are probably a few places that have those idea people around, but when I was looking to start designing things, it was really more of a jack of all trades type thing. It's you're coming up with things, you're doing real work and thinking about how the game and systems and characters and environment all kind of come together to make this cohesive thing, this experience you want to share. And I had I was like, what are the core pieces to being able to do that? And thankfully, I had already put together made a bit of progress with the audio aspects. Like I understand how to write music, how to think about music and sound in a way that makes things more, I don't know, feel more real, like you're experiencing something. And I was trying to think of the other pieces that I need to finish that puzzle. And I ended up with a sort of 4-track program that I had kind of put together for myself, where I would teach myself 3D animation, 3D modeling and animation, 2D art, so basically learning your Photoshop or your Adobe Suite type of work, and just fundamentals of game design and production, and programming. And while none of these were particularly geared toward games, with the exception of game design and production, those were things that I was really happy that the community college near me had courses for. I wasn't really expecting it. I was expecting to have to go into some other type of design thing, either a graphic design or a user experience or even just like a business type coursework to kind of fill that gap. But thankfully I was able to take some courses that really emphasized what those mindsets are in the context of making a game. So I had spent about, I don't know, probably 3 years, maybe 3.5, not because I couldn't have finished sooner, but because there's not enough people taking these courses. Community colleges, outside of like coursework for fulfilling transfer credits to another university, it's really hard to fill a roster to have a class go through. So a lot of that 3 years outside of the first year was kind of waiting for classes that I wanted to take to become available, which is a little upsetting. But still, on the other side of that, what I ended up learning was, yes, fundamental skills to knowing how to build a bunch of these pieces. So I knew at the end of this coursework how to model something, how to texture something, how to animate within 3D space. And I knew how to do 2D art, a little bit of 2D animation as well, in the form of pixel animations. I also learned how to program in 2 different languages. I learned how to program in C# and Java. And I also learned fundamental aspects of game design, which I had been practicing for years already. So it was really just less learning about that, more just where the industry is at, and taking what other people are doing and applying that to what I was already doing in practice. So a lot of the benefit from those kinds of courses really weren't in the learning something, but in the practice of it, where we'd have projects where we'd work with other people and design a game. Not necessarily complete, like a finished product, but to design this thing that you would pitch and then create if you got the green light on it in a real world scenario. Which was honestly really, really beneficial. I enjoyed those projects a lot. But over the course of doing all of that learning about doing things, I think I had learned that what makes a good designer is probably exactly what I was doing. But it isn't learning how to do everything so that you can do it, but it's learning how to do everything so that you can talk with people who can do it better than you. And that has definitely like been taken out of that context for me and where I'm at. One of the key things that I think that I bring to any team these days is that I'm a fairly effective communicator. I'm not I'm not unable to go learn something new and keep up with other people who are working on that thing. I know enough to go do it if you need me to, but there's likely going to be somebody better suited than me to do that, but likely not somebody that has such a breadth of knowledge and potentially skill that they can communicate at all those levels efficiently. Not enough to just talk kind of what's the word, like a very face level, very surface level at some of these things, but actually get at core problems that these other teammates might be facing, understanding how their things fit into a pipeline, understanding why something might take a little bit more time, why this rig isn't working right, why this model's texture isn't working right, why Photoshop crashed again. Okay, that one's not actually something I would know how to solve, but it's certainly something to be aware of. And understanding kind of how those design pieces fit together, what makes balancing a good system, what about how should we lay out this level in an engaging way? How do we ramp up difficulty as we go? How do these characters interact and what are their backstories? Why do we have this bug in our dialogue system and like everyone's like missing the last character of all of their words, and being able to talk with people and understand why that might be a problem and potentially offer some idea of where to go look. And all of that isn't necessarily knowing how to do the thing. I mean, knowing how to do the thing helps, but actually doing the thing isn't necessarily a part of needing to fit into that whole cycle of actually creating a game. Or, as I've learned since going through that education, really creating anything. That the value of doing something is very high. Like if you can do something, that's great. And as somebody who's working on their own, especially like how I will shortly be, working on my own projects on my own until I can afford to have other people help out, knowing how to do a lot of this is very good. But it's usually the people who have to go into those kinds of scenarios where they have to learn to do a lot of things that, even if they end up on the other side of that, not necessarily doing all these things anymore, they learn a lot of how to communicate effectively with the people who do have to do that eventually. And I think that's probably the most important thing that I've gotten out of learning how to make games, or learning all the facets about making them. Something that Heather had gone through with her education, where it was more focused on like the art aspects of creating games, but you have this really strong focus on this one thing, and you you barely learn enough about everything else to have more than those surface level discussions. And I suppose if you're going to go into that space and you want to do art, or you want to do environmental like design and things like that, then it might be okay to put more of your eggs in that one basket and just become more of an expert in that one part of creating this really big thing, this really big idea. But it's hard to discount the value that I got from going at each of them equally, but not so deep that I'd be a master at any of them. And I guess that's kind of a risk there when people are looking for somebody who's just like this super duper expert on one thing, and they're going to hire you because you're a genius in this one area, that instead you're banking on your value of being able to connect those people and those teams to each other in a very effective way. And it's kind of interesting that I don't think I really see a ton of roles like that. I guess the game designer and probably the producer are probably the most likely to have that kind of a description like designers these days are doing a lot of they're effectively coders, but they're effectively writing scripts most of the time. Things that other tools teams built for them to use, but they are proficient enough at code to be able to use a scripting language to build what they want to build. They're given tools, and your programmers are building the systems and tools that they can use to further build upon. So you're still like an effective communicator. You need to do that, but you're also very technical these days with that. And a producer, I suppose, would be more like, how's the timeliness of this project going? So you need to be able to talk with everybody, but maybe not at the level that you know kind of the ins and outs of each part of the process. I suppose that'd probably be the role that would need that communication the most. So maybe that's where that is. But where I'm at now, I think you'd probably see that more in like a management position, but I don't at least see it where I'm at now, where you have somebody that's really just dedicated to connecting all of the things that need to be connected. You have people who manage like the release schedule and your backlog and the actual development of things, and keeping your backlog organized, and people who design solutions. And you just kind of hope that one of those people will be an effective communicator. But if not, things can really fall off the rails really fast, honestly. And I've learned to kind of embrace that, the value of that communication that game design opened for me, that I was able to be one of those kinds of people that's just like, yeah, there's a lot going on here, and there's a missing communication piece that honestly needs filling, and then filling that. And still learning a bunch along the way. Just that part of me, like from that game design like background, it was like learning two things. It's like, how do I plug in with everybody around me, and how do I use the people around me to learn how to learn? Those are probably like two of the biggest things that came out of what I did with that community college program that I had built for myself. And it's worked up until now. So we'll kind of see how that keeps on going, honestly. I'd be curious to see if the skills that we kind of built up from all of my educational background, plus actually being in a space like that and filling that role for so long, that we can just see if I can prove that it has value outside of this like stable corporate structure, basically. Definitely going back into the doing a lot of things again, but hopefully knowing that I'm familiar with that, learning how to learn, and being able to pick up certain things, and that is how I'm a good communicator, is having learned enough to get something good out there. It'd be kind of neat to see how that all goes again. But yeah, thought it was kind of a neat thing. I've been talking about it a little bit with people that I work with, just like, how are you a good communicator? How do you end up finding out how to connect other people and teams, despite me being a developer, being able to connect product and planning and support and documentation and development and QA and all of these things? How do you do that? How do you do that well? And a bit of that is kind of learning enough to know how to talk to them efficiently, and knowing enough as well, in a different sense, that they could do it better than you, and trusting them and making sure they have the right knowledge to take that further than you could. So yeah, game design kind of helped a lot in that regard. Even though I don't use that skill actively like anymore, I still occasionally do some design work. And I think it was even as recently as like a year ago that I'd basically just taken a weekend to put together a match 3 puzzle game with a twist, and just see that to a prototype completion state, So it's an actual working playable game. It's just about as good as you'd imagine for spending 48 hours on it. But still understanding all of those core components and how they feed into each other, and understanding how that would work in a team setting, like all that I wouldn't know. I wouldn't have as good of a grasp as I do on that now, if not for going through what I had thought were the important aspects of creating a game or being a designer. That all of where that was culminating in, all of where that was leading to, was not necessarily doing all of the things, but knowing enough to communicate with the people who do. And that has a surprising amount of value. Anyway, I think we'll call it that for today. Hope you're having a wonderful Friday, and we will catch you in the next one. See ya.